For decades, the crown has stood as a symbol of unyielding strength, a golden mask hiding the fragile humanity beneath. But tonight, the corridors of Buckingham Palace are cold with a silence that feels like a final breath. King Charles III, the man who waited a lifetime to wear the weight of history, has just shattered royal protocol in a way no one ever expected. Amidst swirling whispers of new health fears, darker and more urgent than the palace has ever admitted, the king has made a sudden, final decision regarding Prince William's coronation. This isn't just a transition of power. It is a desperate act of preservation in a family haunted by its own mortality. Before we dive into the chilling truth that forced the king's hand, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update on this royal reckoning. The notice came in the early hours of the morning, a time usually reserved for the most somber of news. There was no fanfare, no glossy press release, just a private summons that pulled Prince William away from his family and into the heart of the sovereign's private study. Insiders described the king as a figure transformed, no longer just a monarch, but a father looking at his heir with a gaze heavy with regret and an unspoken warning. You've watched the palace manage the narrative for months, using the word privacy as a shield to hide a crumbling reality. But you don't cancel a future king's engagements for weeks unless the tooth of time is biting deeper than they want to say. The king's health, once a matter of quiet concern, has reportedly reached a breaking point that has shifted the entire chessboard of the British monarchy. In that dimly lit room, surrounded by the ghosts of kings past, Charles didn't speak of a long reign. He spoke of an end. He spoke of a coronation that cannot wait for the natural cycle of life. A coronation that must happen under terms that will change William's life forever. The decision was final. The king has demanded that the transition begin now, in secret, behind the heavy velvet curtains of protocol. But why the sudden urgency? What did the latest medical briefings reveal that was so terrifying it made a king surrender his own future to his son? Whispers from within the medical wing suggest that the shadow has grown longer, and the king's primary concern is no longer his own legacy, but whether the crown will survive the transition at all. He is not just handing over a title. He is handing over a burden that he knows might break his son, just as it has tested every man who came before him. As William left that meeting, witnesses say his face was pale, his eyes carrying a weight that hadn't been there an hour prior. This was the moment the fairy tale died and the brutal reality of the institution took over. The king has set the clock in motion, and the gears of the monarchy are turning with a violent speed that threatens to expose every secret the family has tried to bury. But the most shocking part of the king's decision isn't just the timing. It's the hidden clause he added, a clause that involves the one person who was supposed to be gone for good. The silence following the king's declaration didn't just linger. It suffocated. Behind the closed doors of the private apartments, a new reality began to take shape, one that the public was never meant to see. This sudden shift toward William's coronation isn't just a change in schedule. It is the activation of a long-dormant contingency plan, whispered about in the shadows of the Privy Council for months. The king's health fears have pushed the monarchy into a regency in all but name, a desperate attempt to stabilize the throne before the storm breaks. But beneath the surface of this official transition lies a bitter conflict between the old guard and the new. While William prepares to shoulder the weight of the crown, his thoughts remain anchored to the hidden clause his father revealed, the return of the exile. The king knows that a house divided cannot stand, especially when the foundation is cracking. His final decision was not just about William's rise, but about a forced reconciliation that feels more like a prison sentence than a family reunion. Sources close to the medical wing whisper that the king's condition has forced him to look at the monarchy not as a fairy tale, but as a survivalist institution. He has realized that for William to succeed, the hairy problem must be resolved, even if it means dragging the truth out into the light at the last possible moment. This wasn't transparency born of choice. It was truth dragged out by the sheer weight of necessity. Meanwhile, the palace machine is working overtime to Project Rembrandt the situation, trying to control the narrative before the whispers turn into a roar. They are scrubbing the archives and tightening the protocols, yet the cracks are becoming too deep to hide. William now stands at a crossroads, caught between the duty he was born for and the brother he was forced to cast aside. The weight of Diana's legacy hangs heavy over this decision. She always warned that the brothers would be used against one another by the institution itself, and as William looks at the secret briefings spread before him, he sees the patterns re-emerging. The king's decision has effectively dropped the mask, exposing a system that is more afraid of the truth than it is of the scandal. As the sun sets over Windsor, the gears of the coronation are already in motion, but they are grinding with a friction that suggests something is about to break. This isn't just the beginning of a new reign. It is the final act of an era that refused to admit it could bleed. And as the world waits for the next official statement, the real story is being written in the tears and the tension of those who are trapped behind the palace walls. As the machinery of the state begins to pivot toward William, the atmosphere inside the palace has shifted from one of tradition to one of tactical survival. The king's decision has effectively overruled his entire court, a move that has left seasoned advisors reeling in the wake of his sudden transparency. For months, the palace relied on polished lines and carefully staged optics, but the king has now admitted that the silence had a cost they can no longer afford to pay. This wasn't just a health update. It was a confession that the institution was reaching its breaking point. Behind the scenes, the struggle for control is intensifying as the transition protocols are rewritten in real time. The king's insistence on no more hiding has forced the family to look into a mirror they have avoided for decades, exposing a system that humanizes the crown only when it is forced to admit its own mortality. William now finds himself at the center of a storm he didn't ask for, holding a secret that could either redeem the monarchy or bring it to its knees. The condition his father added to the coronation involves a redistribution of duty that makes Harry's return not just a possibility, but a requirement for the crown's survival. It is a bargain struck in the shadow of illness, a trade of truth for stability. But the archives hold more than just medical records. As the gears of the new regency turn, more leaked narratives are beginning to surface, painting a picture of a family divided not by miles, but by the very protocols meant to protect them. William has realized that the polished palace narratives he once defended were often constructed at a terrible human cost. The question now isn't just about who will wear the crown, but what version of the truth will be allowed to survive alongside it. The world is watching a king and his heir stand side by side, finally telling a story that was far more dangerous than the cameras were ever allowed to see. Every cancellation and every missing photo from the past few months has led to this moment, a moment where the fairy tale is officially over and the reckoning begins. The revelation of the king's final decision has sent shockwaves through the very foundations of the British establishment. This was the night the palace finally dropped its guard, admitting that the woman who holds the emotional center of this monarchy, and the heir who was born to lead it, are facing a reality far more serious than any official statement ever allowed the world to see. For months, the public was fed polished palace lines while schedules were canceled and photos were faked, all under the guise of privacy. But silence in a public institution is a dangerous game, and the cost of that secrecy is finally being tallied. Inside the private quarters, the atmosphere is one of truth being dragged out at the last possible moment. William has come to realize that you don't keep canceling a future king's schedule for nothing. The gears of the monarchy are grinding toward a conclusion that no one was prepared for. The king's health fears have acted as a catalyst, forcing a confrontation between the cold palace machine and the honest vulnerability that the family has desperately tried to suppress. The final sudden decision regarding the coronation isn't just about a change of crowns. It's about who gets to own the story moving forward. William is no longer just a prince waiting in the wings. He is a man forced to oversee a system that is reaching its breaking point, a system more afraid of truth than of scandal. As the protocols are bypassed, a chilling question lingers. Why did it take this long to be this honest? The king and his heir now stand side by side, not just as symbols of a constitution, but as a father and son finally admitting that the fairy tale has cracks that can no longer be mended with paint and protocol. The coronation, once envisioned as a celebration of continuity, has been reframed as a test of survival, a test of whether an ancient institution can adapt to human mortality before it is too late. As the world watches the mask slip, the internal pressure continues to build. Every missing month and every silent week has led to this high-stakes reckoning, where the future of the monarchy depends on a truth that has been hidden for far too long. The price of the throne is being recalculated, and for William, the cost may be higher than he ever imagined. Behind the heavy velvet curtains of Buckingham Palace, the Project Rembrandt strategy, designed to maintain a facade of total control, is beginning to fail. The king's decision to transition power early was born from a chilling truth that could no longer be contained within the palace archives. As the gears of the new regency turn, the silence that once served as a shield has become a weapon used against the family from the inside. Whispers from the medical wing have leaked, suggesting that the health fears mentioned in official briefings are merely the surface of a much deeper institutional crisis. For months, the palace prioritized optics over transparency, but you don't lose sight of a future queen and a reigning king for weeks by accident. This wasn't just about managing a medical schedule. It was about who gets to own the narrative when the system reaches its breaking point. William has found himself caught in a high-stakes confrontation with the palace machine, a machine that is more afraid of the truth than of the scandal it tries to prevent. He is beginning to see that the polished fairy tale he was raised to defend was built on a foundation of half-truths. The internal tension reached a boiling point when a misfiled folder in the king's private study revealed the 2020 Accord, a secret trade of exile for silence that directly led to the current family fracture. This revelation has forced William to realize that the monarchy doesn't just manage feelings. It manages perception, and that is exactly where the survival crisis began. The king's sudden decree of no more hiding was a direct response to a confrontation so raw it left the senior aides stunned. As the world watches the crown being handed over in the shadow of urgency, the hidden cost of the throne is finally coming to light. Every fake photo and every vague update was a delay of the inevitable. Now, with the mask slipping, the monarchy must admit that it is mortal, a confession that changes the script of the British crown forever. The transition is no longer a ceremonial tradition. It is a desperate race to tell the truth before the institution crumbles under the weight of its own secrets. The sudden urgency of King Charles's final decision has unearthed more than just medical protocols. It has resurrected the very ghosts the palace spent decades trying to bury. Deep within the private archives, a hidden dossier has surfaced, containing a letter from Princess Diana that warned of this exact moment. A moment where the brothers would be pulled apart not by duty, but by internal betrayal. She feared the day the monarchy would use one son to protect the institution while discarding the other, and William is now realizing that her haunting prose was a prophecy he can no longer ignore. The king's health fears have acted as a brutal catalyst, forcing him to admit that the Project Rembrandt tactics of the past were not just about managing optics, but about controlling reality itself. William has discovered that the narrative of Harry's departure was filtered through layers of half-truths, constructed not for peace, but for institutional control. This wasn't transparency. It was a truth dragged out only when the king saw something at a hospital bedside that terrified him more than any bad headline ever could. In a confrontation described as fit for Shakespeare, voices were raised and the past was unearthed in the halls of Clarence House. William isn't just angry. He is devastated to find that the very system he was born to defend has been operating under a protocol of silence that humanizes the crown only as a last resort. The king's decision to move forward with the coronation transition is a desperate admission that the house is divided, and the foundation is cracking under the weight of its own secrets. As the world watches the transition of power, the real story is the failure of the palace machine to protect its own. The king has realized that his primary concern must shift from his own legacy to whether the monarchy can even survive the transition without admitting its own mortality. The masks have officially slipped, and as the gears of the coronation grind forward, the price of the throne is being recalculated in tears and tension. William now stands as a future king who must decide if he will inherit a crown or a lie. The coronation transition has now moved into a phase of ruthless calculation, where the personal and the political have become indistinguishable. King Charles, acting not as a father but as a monarch fighting for the survival of the dynasty, has presented William with a proposition that has left the heir in stunned silence. This isn't just a simple handover of duties. It is a shocking bargain designed to protect the monarchy's most dangerous secrets from ever seeing the light of day. Charles has made it clear that while Harry's return is now an inevitability, how the public understands it remains a narrative the palace must control. The king's offer to William is brutal in its simplicity. A clear, uncontested path to the throne with no internal sabotage or press leaks, in exchange for absolute silence. To ensure William's compliance, the king revealed the existence of a secret recording made by Princess Diana just days before her death, a tape that has been locked in a private vault for decades. The contents of this recording reportedly link a senior royal figure to the calculated isolation and departure of Prince Harry, a betrayal that, if released, would destroy the legacies of everyone involved. William now realizes his father isn't trying to mend the family. He is trying to preserve a lie, even if it means sacrificing the very idea of unity he claims to defend. The king's no more hiding policy was merely a tactic to force the truth into a shape that the institution can survive, rather than a genuine act of transparency. As the gears of the regency grind forward, William is facing the ultimate test of his morality and his future as a leader. He has witnessed a king who is willing to overrule his own court to manage a crisis, but at the cost of the crown's soul. The final sudden decision was a masterstroke of preservation, but it has left William standing at the edge of a reckoning, haunted by the realization that he may have to become the very thing he promised never to be. As the global headlines explode with news of the king's sudden transition, a hidden mechanism within the palace walls has roared back to life. Behind locked doors, royal advisors have activated a secret initiative known as Project Rembrandt, a high-stakes plan designed to control the fallout and erase the truths that have begun to leak through the cracks. This isn't about healing the family. It is a clinical operation to control the lens and control the legacy, even if it means sacrificing the very people at the heart of the monarchy. The panic in the palace corridors is unrelenting as leaked emails surface, detailing a coordinated plan to discredit any narrative that challenges the institutional mask. William, already reeling from the heavy burden of the king's bargain, was blindsided by the activation of this shadowy defense. He has realized that the palace machine doesn't just manage feelings. It tries to control reality itself, and this time, they are using it against his own brother. In an unprecedented move, William stormed into a palace briefing, catching the communications team mid-discussion as they plotted to turn Harry into a scapegoat for the monarchy's survival. His fury was a direct challenge to the ancient gears of protocol, a refusal to inherit a crown built on the destruction of his own blood. He is seen through the illusion of privacy and dignity, recognizing them as shields used to delay the arrival of uncomfortable truths. The king's decision has forced a choice: protect the crown at all costs, or protect the soul of the family. As the whistleblower journalists close in on the truth behind Project Rembrandt, the palace has been cornered, its mask slipping further with every passing hour. William now stands as a future king who has threatened to dismantle the machine from within, vowing that he will no longer be complicit in a silence that has cost his family everything. The gears of the coronation are turning, but the man about to wear the crown is no longer playing by their rules. The palace machine was caught completely off guard when William decided he would no longer be a silent pawn in their game of shadows. In a move that shattered every royal convention, the heir ignored his advisors and press releases to speak directly to a world exhausted by royal secrecy. He looked straight into the lens, no longer a polished figurehead delivering a rehearsed message, but a brother and a son reclaiming a narrative that had been stolen by protocol. In this moment of unprecedented transparency, William did what few before him had dared. He named the failure of the institution itself. He admitted that the crown had failed to protect its own, and that the silence they once called dignity was actually a failure of pride and a refusal to face the truth. By addressing the rifts openly, he signaled a transition of power that wasn't just about a crown, but about a fundamental shift in how the monarchy would exist in the 21st century. He vowed that the next chapter of the monarchy, his chapter, would not be lived behind the heavy, velvet curtains of press management and Project Rembrandt. He insisted that accountability would no longer be a choice, but the very foundation upon which the future of the crown would be built. This wasn't just a political strategy. It was a desperate plea for the soul of a family that had been nearly destroyed by its own secrets. The king's health fears had forced the masks to drop, but it was William who chose to keep them off. He invoked the memory of his mother, Diana, not as a static symbol, but as a warning of what happens when the institution prioritizes its own survival over human life. By opening the door to Harry without the conditions of the palace machine, William didn't just reclaim control. He proved that a modern monarchy can only survive if it is willing to admit it can bleed. The nation and the world now stand at the edge of a new era, witnessing a monarchy that has been forced to face its own mortality and the ghosts of its past. King Charles's final, sudden decision has set in motion a chain of events that no amount of palace spin or Project Rembrandt could ever truly contain. The transition toward William's coronation is no longer a polished fairy tale. It is a raw and fragile reality, born from the realization that an ancient institution must either adapt to human vulnerability or crumble under the weight of its own secrets. As William prepares to take the throne, he does so with the heavy knowledge that the crown he inherits is fractured. The bargain of silence his father once proposed has been rejected in favor of a truth that has finally dropped the mask of Buckingham Palace. The world has watched a king and his heir admit that they could no longer hide behind the curtains of protocol, and that the cost of that silence was nearly the soul of their family. But the question of the future remains anchored to the one voice that has yet to be fully heard. Inside the quiet walls of Frogmore Cottage, Prince Harry faces a decision that will define the legacy of the House of Windsor for generations. Will he accept the open door and the honest transparency William has promised, or has the betrayal within the palace archives left wounds that even a crown cannot heal? The cryptic messages and the leaked narratives suggest that healing does not always mean returning, and the price of reconciliation may be a history that can never be fully rewritten. In the end, this crisis has proven that the monarchy is no longer just a harmless fairy tale. It is a test case for power, secrecy, and the human cost of an institution that still rules over millions. As the cameras fade and the global headlines continue to roar, one truth remains undeniable. The British crown will never look the same again. It is a system that has finally been forced to admit it can bleed, and if it wants to survive, it can never go back to pretending that nothing ever breaks behind palace walls.